Mama. Mom. That's him. The baby alien girl whispered, and the Queen's War Council, music, fell into stunned silence. The War Council chamber of the Valerium Dominion ran on cold silver light, and Queen Zareth had, music, not lifted her eyes from the central slab for almost an hour. Around her, 12 high admirals stood in their dark violet dress armor, helmets cradled in the crook of one arm as protocol demanded. The slab at the center of the chamber held a map. A slow-rotating hologram of the border sector where 2 Valerium frigates had been lost 3 weeks earlier to what her intelligence chief called a human ambush. The chief had never been wrong before. The chief was wrong now, and she did not yet know it. Behind the Queen, a guard drew breath to announce the prisoner. Ethan Harlow came through the arched doors between 2 soldiers whose restrained harnesses hummed against his wrists. He was thinner than he had been 4 months ago. His dark hair had been shorn close to the scalp on intake. His jaw was bruised from the shuttle transfer. The gray prisoner's tunic fit him badly across the shoulders and made him look like a man used up by something much bigger than a small room. His eyes were the only part of him that had refused to be processed. They were steady dark blue, fixed somewhere just past the Queen's left ear, the way a man looks at the horizon when he doesn't want to look at what's in front of him. He had been told what was coming. He had not been told it would be this formal. Queen Zareth finally raised her head. Her skin was the deep violet of a storm cloud at dusk, her hair a long silver fall down her back, and a faint luminescent tracery of lighter pigment ran across her cheekbones in the pattern that marked her bloodline. Her eyes were the color of a struck match. When she looked at Ethan, the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop by a degree. "Human," she said. Her standard was clipped, accented, too precise to be a first language. "You are accused of the murder of the royal nursemaid Sativa and the abduction of an heir of the Dominion. You will be heard, and then you will be sentenced. Do you understand?" Ethan did not answer at once. The guards tensed. "I understand what you're saying," he said. "You've got the story backwards." High Admiral Vorik made a sound in his throat. One of the younger admirals, a woman named Keshrin, did not. The Queen lifted 2 fingers. The whole chamber quieted. She was about to speak again when the side door opened, the small one, the clear's throat, one that connected the council chamber to the royal apartments. Through it came the palace attendant Nera with a small bundle in her arms and an apology already half formed on her lips. The Queen's daughter. 14 months old by Dominion reckoning, violet skin like her mother but pale, a soft lavender, the color babies of their line always carried before their markings came in. Her hair was wispy silver. Her eyes, when she opened them, were astonishingly large. Nera froze at the threshold. "Forgive me, Majesty." She would not settle. "She has been calling for you all morning." The Queen was already halfway out of her seat to wave the attendant back into the apartments. The baby, whose name was Lyra, did not look at her mother. She looked past her mother across the length of the council chamber to the gray-tunicked man standing between 2 guards at the far end. Her little body went still in Nera's arms. Her small hand came out, one finger extended, the way a child points at something she wants to name for the first time. Her mouth opened around a word she had been working on for weeks without any of them realizing what it was. "Mom," she said. "That's him." The silence that fell was not like other silences. It was the silence that comes when a whole room understands all at once that it has been wrong about something and has not yet worked out how wrong. Queen Zareth did not move. She was standing with one hand still braced against the council table. Her weight shifted for a step she was no longer taking. Her face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. The last one settled around her mouth like ice forming on a pond. Her eyes had not left her daughter. They now moved slowly, the way a gun moves across the length of the chamber, and onto Ethan Harlow's face. Ethan's own expression had already broken. He was looking at the baby like a man who had been holding his breath for 4 months and had finally been allowed to let it out. Admiral Vorik, who was old and cautious and had loved the Queen's late husband like a brother, said very quietly, "Majesty." The Queen raised her hand. He stopped. Leave us, she said. Her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. All of you, now, except the prisoner and my daughter. No one moved. No, she said again. They moved. To understand what happened in that chamber, and why the high admirals of the Valerium Dominion walked out of a war they had already started pulling back from, you have to go back 4 months to a world called Meriden, a small world forth from a yellow sun orbiting quietly at the outer edge of the Dominion's colonial reach. Meriden had a population of 900,000, most of them farmers and kelp harvesters working the long shallow seas that wrapped 3/4 of the southern hemisphere. Meriden was also very discreetly where the royal family hid its children. It was an old custom, older than the Dominion itself. The direct heirs of the Valerium throne were born in the capital and then, within weeks, sent quietly to a rural world where they grew up for the first 3 years of their lives under other names and in the care of nursemaids and quiet guards. The practice had begun 800 years earlier after an assassination that had very nearly ended the royal line. It had continued ever since. A queen who did not know precisely where her child was could not be coerced. The world was chosen by a council she did not sit on. Even Zareth had not known where Lyra was. She had only known that somewhere in her dominion, a small woman named Sativa was feeding her daughter and humming her to sleep. Meriden was the world, and Meriden was where the fever came. No one in Valerium space had seen it before. Later analysis would show that the pathogen had crossed into the Dominion through a trade shipment from an independent station at the edge of the neutral zone, had mutated in a rodent population on a cargo freighter, and had stepped off that freighter onto Meriden in the body of a dockworker with a mild cough. Within 10 days, 1/3 of the southern coastal towns were sick. Within 20, the colonial governor had sealed the planet and requested emergency assistance from the Dominion fleet. Within 30, the request had been quietly upgraded to a request for biological quarantine. And within 40, the Dominion had begun to discuss, in rooms Zareth did not yet sit in, the option of orbital sterilization. Ethan Harlow was not supposed to be within 1,000 light-years of any of this. He was a search and recovery medic attached to the Federation rescue cutter Halden's Lamp, a small fast ship whose job was to find crashed pilots and down explorers and get them home. He was 34 years old. He had lost 2 brothers and a wife in 3 unrelated disasters over the course of 6 years, and at some point after the 3rd funeral, he had accepted, without much drama, that his life's work was going to be hauling other people's people out of bad places. He was good at it. He had an oddly calm quality under pressure. He did not talk much. Children liked him, which had always surprised him, and which he had stopped trying to explain. The Halden's Lamp had been chasing a distress signal from a civilian prospector near the far edge of neutral space when its sublight engine went. The secondary stabilizers went with it. The ship did what small ships do in that situation, which is fall. 4 of her crew made the lifeboats. Ethan and the pilot did not. They rowed the ship down into the atmosphere of the nearest habitable world, which the NAV charts labeled as a minor Dominion colony called Meriden, and which was already, unknown to them, under soft quarantine. The pilot died on impact. Ethan woke up 4 hours later in a crater of smoking moss with the left side of his ribs screaming, and the sky above him a strange pale lavender. He spent the first day climbing out of the wreck. He spent the second day finding a road. He spent the 3rd day understanding that something was very wrong with the world he had landed on because every road he walked was empty, and every village he passed had red cloth tied to its gateposts, and the few people he saw moved the way people move in places where they have recently stopped. Expecting help. He was not trying to be anywhere. He was trying to stay alive until someone came looking for him. He had no way to know that his distress beacon, which had survived the crash, was broadcasting on a frequency the Dominion's orbital platforms were actively jamming because they did not want anyone to hear what was happening on Meriden. On the 5th day, he heard a child crying. The sound came from a long low house at the edge of a town whose name he could not read because the signs were in Valerium script. The door of the house was open. Inside, on a woven mat in the main room, lay a small woman with violet skin gone ashy and gray, her chest rising in the shallow, irregular rhythm of a body that had given up everything except the last stubborn instinct to keep breathing. She had drawn a blanket up over her own legs and over the legs of the baby lying on the mat beside her. The baby was awake. The baby had been awake and alone, and crying for a long time. Ethan did not know anything about Valerium children. He knew that when a baby that small cried like that and his caretaker's eyes tracked him the way this woman's were tracking him, he was about to receive the last and most serious instruction of another person's life. He knelt. The woman's hand, so thin it was almost translucent, came up and found his sleeve. "Not Valerium!" she rasped. The standard was clumsy in her mouth. "You, not Valerium!" "No. I'm human." Her eyes closed and opened again. "Better." He didn't know what she meant. He thought then that she meant it was better that he wasn't Valerium because he wasn't sick. He learned a month later that she had meant something different. "Take her," the woman said. "I don't know where to take her. Away from the red cloth, away from ships. She is." The woman's throat worked. "She is important. Please, her name is." She did not finish the sentence. Her hand loosened on his sleeve and slid to the mat. Ethan sat on the floor of that house for a long time. The baby had stopped crying. She was watching his face with the quiet, serious expression of a very small person who has figured out that the bigger person has not yet decided anything and that her job right now is to be as still as possible. He picked her up. He felt her weight settle against his collarbone the way human babies settled, and he thought distantly that evolution on different worlds had worked out some of the same answers to the same problems. He wrapped her in the cleanest cloth he could find in the house. He took a jar of what smelled like milk from the cold box and slung it in a satchel. He took the woman's shoes for himself because his boot had split in the crash. He closed the woman's eyes. He stood in the doorway for a second longer than he needed to because he had learned over the years that leaving too quickly was a kind of disrespect, and he did not want to begin whatever this was with disrespect. Then he walked out of that town with a sick world's future tucked against his neck and no idea what was coming for him. The first week was the hardest. Ethan had kept his field kit, which meant he had rehydration salts, an emergency nutrition gel that turned out to be tolerable for the baby after he tested it in tiny amounts, a small water purifier, and a thermal blanket. He did not have diapers. He improvised and he got better at it. The baby, whose name he still did not know, slept against his chest and woke every few hours to eat and fuss and look at the sky. She did not smile. She did not cry much either. He worried about that at first. Then he understood that she had been lying next to a dying woman in an empty house for what he could only guess were days, and she had learned at 14 months of age the rules of a quiet child in a world that had stopped making room for noise. He taught her to smile again by smiling at her. It took 4 days. When she finally did it back to him, lopsided and startled, like a muscle she had forgotten how to use, he had to sit down on a rock and put his face in his hand for a minute. He started calling her Little Bird. It was not a translation of anything. It was the only name his tired brain could offer. Her. He avoided the towns. He followed the old farm roads that ran parallel to the coast heading north because north was away from the spaceport, and the spaceport in a quarantine was the most dangerous place on the planet. He drank from streams he purified with the filter. He caught small things in traps he wove from wire, and ate them cooked over fires he built in old kilns and stone circles. He shared his food with her in forms soft enough for her mouth. He slept with her tucked inside his jacket, and woke every time she stirred. On the 9th day they were stopped at a crossroads by a Valerium man on an old riding beast, a broad gray thing with 4 shoulders and a temper. The man's skin was a pale violet. His eyes were red-rimmed. He held a rifle across his saddle. "You," the man said. He stared at the bundle. "What is that?" "A child." "Whose?" "A woman who died. She asked me to take the baby somewhere safe." The man looked at him for a long time. The rifle did not come up. Eventually the man said, "There is nowhere safe on this world." "I know." The man was quiet again. Then he got down from his riding beast. He went to a saddlebag. He brought out a packet of dried fruit in a small cloth wrap of something that smelled like herbs. He pressed both into Ethan's free hand. "Go north," he said. "At the third river, go east. There is a harbor town called Savat. The fishermen there are not cowards. They may take you across the strait. After the strait, I do not know. Why are you helping me?" The man looked at the bundle against Ethan's chest. A complicated expression went through his face. For a half-second Ethan thought the man was about to say something very important. Then the man just shook his head. "Because she is small," he said. "And you are tired. And my wife had our daughter 3 weeks ago, and I am going home now to find out whether they are still alive." He climbed back onto the riding beast and went south. Ethan went north. On the 11th day he found the schoolhouse. It sat a quarter-mile off the road in a field of tall green stalks that had started to go to seed without anyone cutting them. A single-story building of fired clay brick with a peaked roof and a painted sign over the door he could not read. The door had been latched from the outside, which meant whoever had left it had expected to come back. No one had come back. The latch was rusted. The windows were intact. Inside there were 15 small chairs stacked in a corner, a teacher's desk with a half-empty cup of something that had grown a skin on top of it, and a shelf of children's books in the Valerium script he could not read but could recognize from the pictures. A drawing of a river with fish in it, a drawing of a red flower, a drawing of a small creature that might have been a dog or might have been something his planet did not have a word for. He slept there for 2 nights. It was the first roof he had slept under since the crash. He built a small fire in the teacher's stove, heated water, warmed the baby's milk properly for the first time in a week. He found a package of what looked like dry biscuits in a drawer, tested one on his own tongue, found it stale but not dangerous, and fed her small pieces soaked in milk until she was fuller than she had been since he picked her up. She slept that night with a handful of his shirt in her small fist, the way she slept most nights, and she made small contented sounds in her sleep that he had never heard before. He left a note on the teacher's desk in Standard that almost certainly no one there would read. It said, "Thank you." He left one of his last ration bars next to it. He did not know why he did that. He just did not want to take without leaving anything, even from a room that had been left by people he would never meet. On the afternoon of the 13th day, he met the family. They were walking the same road he was, a man, a woman, 3 children, and a small cart pulled by a smaller 4-shouldered beast with one bad eye. The youngest child was in the cart, asleep. The oldest, a boy of maybe 9, was walking beside it with a stick in his hand and an expression far too serious for his age. When he saw Ethan, he stepped in front of his mother without a word and raised the stick. Ethan stopped at 50 paces and put both his hands out to his sides and let the family look at him. The father, after a long moment, handed his own pack to his wife and walked forward alone. "You are human," the man said. His standard was better than the nursemaids had been. He had been a shipping clerk at the spaceport before the quarantine. He said so without being asked, the way people in disaster sometimes announce their old jobs like name tags. "Yes. You have a child." "Yes." "Not yours." "No." The man looked at the bundle for a long time. Then he looked back at his wife. They had one of those conversations that long married people have with their faces. Then he turned back to Ethan. "My wife says you do not look like a man who would harm a child," he said. "My wife is usually right about these things. I am going to trust her today because I do not have the energy to be suspicious anymore." "Where are you going?" "North, a harbor called Savat. Bad road between here and there. A Dominion checkpoint at the bridge over the Anna River. They are not letting anyone across who cannot prove residency." "I don't have residency." "No. You do not." The man thought for a minute. "There is an old ford 2 kilometers upstream of the bridge. Before the bridge was built, cattle used to cross there. The water is shallow in the summer. The child will get wet. You will not be seen from the bridge." "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet." The man reached into his coat and brought out a folded piece of cloth. It was a scrap of gray-green fabric about the size of a handkerchief. He held it out. "Tie this on your pack. If anyone stops you on the north road past the ford, show them this. Do not say anything. They will understand." "What is it?" "A rag from a uniform that does not exist anymore. The settlement guards used to wear this color before the Dominion dissolved the settlement forces 10 years ago. Most of the old guards live up north now. They still help each other. They will help anyone who carries the color at least enough to get you to the next town. I can't take this." "You can. I have 3. My wife's brother was a guard." The man's face did something complicated. "He died in the 2nd week of the fever. He does not need his scraps anymore." Ethan took the cloth. He tied it to the strap of his pack. His throat was doing a thing he did not want to talk about. "What can I give you?" he said. "Nothing. Keep walking." The man glanced at the bundle one more time. "That is a very small child to be on a very long road. Whoever she belongs to, I hope they are worth what you are doing for her." The wife from behind the cart called out something in Valerian that Ethan could not parse. The oldest boy translated in careful standard. "My mother says the baby has her father's eyes." Then the boy looked embarrassed as if he had said too much and dropped the stick and went back to the cart. Ethan did not ask what that meant. He thought he already knew. He tipped his head to the mother across the 50 paces of road. She tipped her head back. They passed each other going opposite directions, and he did not see any of them again. Clear his throat, the 2nd week was worse than the first in ways the first had not prepared him for. The weather changed. A cold rain came off the sea and stayed for 4 days. The baby developed a small fever. Ethan rationed his emergency meds, gave her a half dose of the mildest one, sat up all night with her pressed against his bare skin under the thermal blanket because body heat was the oldest medicine there was and he could not risk more pills. That night was the longest of his life. He sat against the stone wall of a disused kiln with his shirt open and the baby's small body against his chest, and the rain drumming on the curved brick overhead. She was too hot. She was not hot enough to panic yet. He talked to her in a low voice for hours. He told her about things he had not thought about in a decade. He told her about the apple tree in the backyard of his mother's house. He told her about his wife whose name he had not said out loud to anyone in 4 years. He told her about the 2 brothers he had lost and about the way one of them had laughed, which was a laugh Ethan had not heard in so long that he had stopped being able to hear it in his head, and which, as he talked, came back to him briefly out of the dark like a small light. The baby listened to all of it. She did not understand any of it. That was exactly why he said it. He had learned on a lot of bad roads that the thing about talking to a person who could not judge you was that sometimes it lets you finally say the thing. Around dawn, her fever broke. He felt a change in her skin against his sternum before he felt it anywhere else. She made a small damp exhale against his throat and went into the deep sleep of a body that had finished fighting. He sat there for another hour without moving because he did not want to wake her, and because he was not sure his legs would work if he tried to stand. She got better. He got worse. He developed a cough that rattled deep in his chest and refused to leave. He worried briefly that he had caught what was killing this world. He watched himself for the symptoms the dying woman had shown. They did not come. He decided he was simply exhausted and wet, and in his 30s, and that sometimes being exhausted and wet was enough to knock a body down. The baby by this point had begun to babble. She had a small repertoire of sounds. She said one that might have been a word for food. She said one that might have been a word for the riding beast which she had watched with great interest. She said one that was clearly an attempt at his name, which came out as a soft puff of air followed by a consonant, and which he accepted without correcting her. He had stopped being afraid of her aloneness. He had started instead to be afraid of what came after because he was getting closer to Savid, and Savid was a harbor town, and harbor towns were where the Dominion would be thickest. He reached the outskirts of Savid on the 17th day. It was a grey town built into a cleft in the coast. The houses piled up the cliff in layers. A small curved harbor at the bottom full of boats, with orange sails. Half the boats were not moving. A Dominion corvette, low and sleek and violet-armored, sat at anchor just outside the harbor mouth. Ethan lay on his belly in the long grass above the town for 2 hours and watched. Soldiers at the harbor, soldiers at the main road. Soldiers going house to house in a pattern that was too slow to be a search and too focused to be a census. He realized with the flat clarity that came when he had gone long enough without real sleep that they were looking for someone. He did not yet know they were looking for Lyra. He did not go into Savid. He went around Savid. He spent 4 days finding a smaller fishing village down the coast where no soldiers had come yet, and on the 4th evening he sat across a wooden table from a Valerian woman whose name was Asa and whose husband had been dead for 6 years, and he put every piece of currency he had on the table between them and asked her if she would take a man and a baby across the strait. Asa looked at the baby for a long time. "That child," she said at last, "is not from around here." "No? She has a very particular face. I have seen that face before in images." Ethan said nothing. His mouth had gone dry. Asa pushed the currency back across the table. "Keep your money," she said. "I will take you across because I am old and because I am tired of being afraid of the people who do not come to help us. But you should know I do not know what you are carrying. I do not want to know. And whatever you do with her on the other side, you do it fast because the minute anyone else sees that face, there will be ships on the horizon." He nodded. He understood. She took them across the strait that night in a boat with a black sail. The sea was choppy and the stars were close, and the baby, whose name he still did not know, slept against his chest the whole way and did not wake once. When they reached the other side, Asa helped him out of the boat onto a shingle beach. She looked at him one last time in the dark. "Whoever you are, human," she said. "Thank you." He did not know what she was thanking him for. He did later. The Federation had an emergency signal station on a rocky island 200 kilometers inland from that shore. Ethan had memorized the coordinates during his basic training the way every rescue medic memorized them. He walked to it. It took another 6 days. By the time he arrived, he had not eaten anything solid in 30 hours, and the baby had finally begun in small broken sounds to cry for someone she could not name. He activated the beacon. He sat down beside it in the short blue-green grass. He held the baby on his lap and watched her small face work through the grammar of grief she was too young to really understand, and he said to her very quietly, "I'm going to find the people who love you. I promise I'm going to find them." The Federation shuttle came before the Valerian scouts did. That was the only piece of luck he had on that world. It was not enough luck. The shuttle pilot took one look at the baby and said, "Oh no." "What do you mean?" "I mean we are going to have a very serious conversation with the captain about what we just stepped into." They took him up to the cutter that had come for him. They fed the baby proper formula from the infirmary's supply of general-purpose neonate nutrition. They let Ethan shower. They cut his hair because it was a tangle of knots. They gave him a rail bed. He slept for 14 hours. When he woke up, the captain of the cutter was sitting in a chair by his bed, and the captain's face was not friendly. "Harlow," the captain said, "do you have any idea what you have done? I saved a baby. You saved the heir apparent of the Valerian Dominion. Her name is Lyra. Her mother is Queen Zareth, and Queen Zareth has spent the past 3 weeks telling every admiral in her fleet that someone, possibly the Federation, possibly the Independents, possibly a rogue cell we haven't identified yet, murdered her daughter's nursemaid in the middle of a medical quarantine and stole her child. The Dominion has moved 3 battle groups to the border. We are approximately 1 diplomatic mistake away from a war we cannot win." Ethan did not speak for a long moment. "I didn't murder anyone," he said. "I believe you," the captain said. "The Dominion will not. They will want her back, and they will want someone to punish. And since you are the only human who touched her, that someone is going to be you." The Valerian scouts reached the cutter 6 hours later. It was not even a fight. The cutter stood down at the first hail. The captain, who was a decent man in a bad situation, negotiated for exactly one thing, which was that Ethan be transferred to the Dominion alive. He got it. He did not get much else. The baby was taken back to her mother by a Valerian honor guard. She cried when they took her out of Ethan's arms, which the honor guard officer noted with an expression Ethan could not read. Ethan was transferred to a Dominion holding cruiser in shackles. The 4 months that followed were the flattest months of his life. He was kept on a moon he was never told the name of, in a facility carved into the side of a cliff that looked out over nothing. A room, a cot, a toilet behind a screen, a shower every 3rd day, a pair of guards who rotated on a 12-hour cycle and did not speak to him except to tell him to stand against a wall when the door opened. He was not beaten. He was not interrogated in any way that he would have recognized as interrogation. A Valerian medic came twice a week and asked him about what he had eaten, what hurt, whether he had slept. He answered honestly. The medic, whose name was Dell, was not friendly but was not cruel either. And after the 3rd visit, Dell began to stay for 10 extra minutes and ask questions that were not on the form. The baby. Dell said once, not a question, a test. What about her? Was she well when you last saw her? She was healthy, fed, sleeping. She had a small cough, but it was drying up. She didn't like the honor guard officer who took her. She was going to be fine as long as someone held her for a while after. Dell wrote something on a pad. Dell did not show him what. A week later, Dell came back and said, without preamble, "She is asking for you." Ethan's chest did something he chose not to examine. Asking? Her word, the only word she has. It is a human word, short, 2 syllables, starts with a sound our throats do not make easily. You will understand that I cannot repeat it here. I understand. The Queen has been told. The Queen has not responded. Okay. Dell looked at him for a long moment. Then Dell said, "You are not what was described to my office." "What was described to your office?" "A trafficker, a profiteer, a man who used a medical disaster to remove a child from a lawful household. I was briefed to look for the markers of that kind of person. I do not find them in you. I'm not that. I know." Dell stood up. At the door, Dell paused and said without turning, "I cannot help you. I want you to understand that, but I will not hurt you either. That is as much as any of us in this building have been offering anyone lately. Take it as the small thing it is." Ethan did. It was small. It was also, in a room like that, not nothing. He kept himself functional the way he had kept himself functional on the road. He did push-ups. He stretched. He recited every morning the names of every crash victim he had ever pulled out of a wreck in the order he had pulled them. It was a list that took almost 20 minutes to get through, and he had never said it out loud before. He said it out loud now. The guards watched through the door's small window with expressions he could not read. When the list got to the last 2 names, which were his wife and his younger brother, he paused the way he always paused, and he kept going. He thought sometimes about the baby's small palm against his sternum in the rain. He tried not to think about it too often. The thing he had learned about being in a cell was that the memories you used too much got worn down. He was saving that one. On the morning of the 117th day, 2 guards came for him and told him to put on a clean tunic. They did not tell him why. They shackled him. They walked him through 3 corridors and a courtyard and a shuttle bay. They put him on a shuttle that went up and out and did not tell him where. He watched the planet fall away below him and did not ask questions. He had stopped asking questions around day 40. The shuttle docked with the cruiser. The cruiser went somewhere fast for 2 days. It docked with a palace station that orbited a world whose violet atmosphere he recognized from briefings he had read as a cadet as the Valoran capital. A lift took him down to a chamber he had not been briefed on. The chamber's doors opened onto a council room full of admirals and a queen whose daughter was, just then, in another room, calling for a person she only knew by 2 syllables in a heartbeat. That was how he got to the silence. The doors of the chamber clicked shut behind the last departing admiral. Queen Zara stood very still at the council table. Nera had brought Lyra to her, and was now backing out of the room with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that being invisible was sometimes the highest form of service. The baby, now in her mother's arms, did not look at her mother. She was still looking at Ethan. She had both small hands bunched in the front of her mother's robe, and her face was turned outward, and her expression was the uncomplicated, open certainty of a child who has found, in a room full of strangers, the one person whose voice she remembers. Ethan, standing between guards who had not yet been dismissed, said, "Hey, little bird!" Lyra's whole body jumped. She said something that was not quite a word. She reached. The Queen's arms tightened, not in fear, but in the reflex of a mother who had only just gotten her daughter back. "Little bird," she said. Her voice was flat. "You called her that." "She didn't have a name I could say. I needed something. Her name is Lyra." "Lyra," Ethan said. He tried it out. "That's a good name." The Queen looked at him for a long time. Her free hand rose and found the top of her daughter's head and rested there. And the baby, who had not wanted to stop looking at Ethan, was gently turned back against her mother's shoulder so the Queen could see Ethan clearly without anything in the way. "Sit," the Queen said. "I'm shackled to two men." The Queen made a small gesture. The two guards looked at each other. The one on the left activated a release on his belt. The harness went slack around Ethan's wrists. He rubbed them absently the way people did when they had stopped feeling something and wanted to make sure it was still there. "Sit, Harlow," the Queen said again. She pointed at a chair. It was not one of the council chairs. It was a low carved chair along the wall that had been placed there for junior attendants. It was, in its own way, not a throne and not a dock. He walked to it and sat down. The Queen sat on the edge of the council table opposite him, which was not protocol, which was the first broken piece of protocol in a chamber that had been built to contain nothing but protocol. She held her daughter against her chest. The baby had gone quiet. The baby was watching both of them with the patient attention of a creature who had decided at some point on a bad road that the adult humans in her orbit sometimes needed a minute. "Tell me," the Queen said. "Everything." He told her everything. He told her about the house with the red cloth at the gate. He told her about the woman on the mat, about the sentence the woman had not finished, about the jar of milk. He told her about the 9 days of walking north with a baby tied to his chest, about the man with the rifle whose wife had just given birth, about the schoolhouse with the stale biscuits, about the shipping clerk's scrap of gray-green cloth. He told her about Sevet in the corvette in the harbor, about Asa in the boat with the black sail. He told her about the beacon, about the weight, about the captain's chair beside his bed. He told her briefly about the facility on the unnamed moon, and about Dell. He did not make any of it sound more than it had been. That was the detail that got her. He had done an extraordinary thing, and he, clear his throat, told it like a man reading a maintenance log. Twice she had to close her eyes. Once when he described the nurse's hand on his sleeve, the Queen's throat worked, and she did not speak for almost a minute afterward. He waited. He did not push. He had learned from a lot of bad bedsides how to sit still in a room with someone who was rearranging their grief. When he was done, he said, "I'm sorry about Sathiva. She tried very hard. You know her name? The Federation captain told me. After?" The Queen bent her head over her daughter's hair for a long moment. Then she said softly, "I chose her myself. She had raised 2 of my cousin's children. She liked the ocean. She wanted a world by the sea. She loved your daughter." "I know." Lyra, who had been mostly still, reached out again, and this time her small palm landed on Ethan's knee. She left it there. She looked up at his face the way children do when they want to be told that they are in the right place with the right people. He put his own hand, very slowly, over hers. Her palm was warm. It was warmer than any Valoran thing he had ever touched. He remembered, with a suddenness that took the breath out of him, what it had felt like to have that exact warmth pressed against his sternum for 17 nights under a wet blanket in a wet country. "I thought she was dead," the Queen said. She was looking at her daughter's hand on his knee. For 2 weeks I thought she was dead, and then for 2 more I thought she had been stolen. And I went into this chamber every morning for a month and listened to men who loved me tell me that the only way to honor my daughter's memory was to burn a border. I almost did it. I was going to at the end of this week. I had decided. I know. You know. Your admirals were not subtle. She almost smiled. It was the first thing close to a smile that had come onto her face since she had walked into that chamber an hour before. It was not a big smile. It was a half-second twitch at the corner of her mouth. He remembered that he had taught her daughter to smile again on a muddy road, and he thought that the 2 smiles were probably not unrelated. He did not say that out loud. He had learned, on a lot of bad roads, what you said out loud and what you kept for yourself. The Queen looked at him. Harlow, she said. What do you want? I want to go home. That is it. That is it. You do not want land. You do not want title. You do not want the gratitude of the Dominion carved into a wall in a language you cannot read. No. Why? He thought about that. He thought about it for a while. The baby was still holding on to his knee. Because I didn't do it for a reward, he said finally. I did it because there was a baby on a mat and a woman was dying, and she asked me. That's clear as throat, the whole story. If I take anything for it, it stops being that story. It becomes a different story. I don't want the different story. I want the one I lived through. The Queen looked at him. He could not read her face. That is a very human answer, she said. I'm a very human person. Yes. She looked down at her daughter. I am beginning to understand that this is not an insult. She stood. Lyra protested, a small fussy sound because Ethan's hand had come off of hers. The Queen shifted the baby to her hip and walked slowly to the doors of the chamber, and stood with her hand on the carved frame, and did not open the doors yet. Harlow, she said without turning. I'm about to do something my admirals will not forgive me for easily. I want you to understand that what happens in the next hour will not be about you. It will be about a war that is not going to happen in a treaty that is going to have to be built very quickly out of almost nothing. And a story I'm going to have to tell my people that they will not at first believe. You will be part of that story. I cannot let you go home immediately. I need you for a little while longer. Not as a prisoner, as a witness. Will you stay? Yes. You did not even ask how long. However long it takes. If it keeps people from dying, I'll stay. She turned her head. She looked at him over her shoulder. The luminescent tracery across her cheekbones was faintly brighter than it had been when he walked in. The way he would learn later, it became when her emotions were running high. She did not say anything. She opened the doors. The admirals came back in with the stiff, formal walk of men and women who had been standing in a corridor pretending not to listen. They found their queen seated at the head of the council table with her daughter asleep on her shoulder, and the human prisoner seated in a low chair along the wall, his wrists free, his hands folded in his lap. The prisoner is not a prisoner, the queen said. The charges are withdrawn. The war is withdrawn. Admiral Vorik, you will stand down the 3rd and 9th battle groups by the end of this day. Admiral Keshrin, you will draft me a communique to the Federation requesting a full diplomatic contact under peace protocols. The rest of you will go to your quarters and consider at length the quality of the intelligence that was placed on this table 3 weeks ago, and the quality of the recommendations you built on top of it. There will be consequences for some of you. There will be none for those of you who have the sense to help me repair this. Admiral Vorik said very carefully, Majesty, the fleet is mobilized. There will be questions. There will be answers. This man carried my daughter on foot across 400 kilometers of a quarantined world. He did it alone. Clear as throat, he did it without asking anything for it. While he was doing it, this council was building a case for the destruction of his people. We were wrong. I was wrong. I will say so publicly. You will stand behind me when I do. Majesty, the High Lords. The High Lords will be invited to meet my daughter's rescuer. I expect them to behave. Admiral Vorik bowed his head. It was the bow of an old soldier who was privately relieved to have been pulled off a course he had been too disciplined to question on his own. The others, one by one, followed. Admiral Kesherin, who was the youngest and had not been in the chamber long enough to have helped build the mistake, did it with something like gratitude. They left. The Queen sat in her chair for a long time with her daughter asleep on her shoulder, and her eyes fixed on the map above the council table, which was still rotating, still showing the border she had been about to burn. She reached out and touched the control, and the map faded. The chamber without it looked smaller and older and less like a place where wars were decided. "Harlow," she said. "Still here. Come sit with me." He stood up a little stiffly and crossed the chamber and sat down in the chair the High Admiral had stood behind. It was the first time a human had ever sat at that table. Either of them mentioned it. Lyra, without waking, reached out a small violet hand and laid it as if in sleep she had remembered something on Ethan's sleeve. The Queen looked down at her daughter's hand. "She will not forget you," she said. "She'll forget. She's very little. She will not forget. We do not forget. It is the thing about us. Her first memories will be of you. For the rest of her life, when she tries to remember before she could remember, she will find your face. I thought you should know." He did not know what to say to that, so he sat and said nothing, which had always been his best skill. The peace, when it was announced 3 days later, moved faster than anyone in the Federation had believed possible. The Dominion fleet stood down on schedule. The border posts reopened on a provisional basis. A joint medical mission was dispatched to Meriden within the week. And what had been building into a biological catastrophe became, over a long 4 months of work, a containable and eventually conquered outbreak. The story of the human who had carried the air was told publicly in the Valeran capital by the Queen herself without ornament, in terms very close to the ones Ethan had used in the council chamber. The Valeran people listened the way people always listen when they are being told a thing that they need to be told. Some of them did not believe it at first. Most of them, by the end of the month, did. A handful of High Lords resigned their positions in protest. A larger handful did not, and quietly rotated their support behind the Queen, and were glad of the change even when they did not say so. The public ceremony came 6 weeks into the peace. Ethan had been dreading it for 3 of those weeks. The Queen had warned him in advance that he would be presented at the Hall of Names, an old chamber in the royal complex where, for 600 years, the Dominion had entered the names of those who had served the crown beyond expectation. A human name had never been entered. There was, as far as anyone knew, no established protocol for entering one. There was, as it turned out, a High Lord named Venash who objected loudly to the whole idea and who, by all accounts, intended to object loudly in person. The hall was full. The Queen wore the plain white robe she reserved for acts of state that she did not want mistaken for performance. Lyra stood at her mother's hip in a small version of the same robe, holding the edge of her mother's sleeve in one small fist and watching the room with the interested gravity of a child who understood, without understanding how, that something important was happening and that she had been allowed to see it. Ethan stood at the center of the hall in a gray tunic the palace had provided him because he had refused the ceremonial robes they had tried to put on him that morning. He had said quietly that if the Dominion was going to enter his name at all, it should enter the name of the man who had actually walked that road, and that man had been wearing gray. High Lord Venash stepped forward before the clerk could read the citation. "Majesty," Venash said, his voice carried. "I must object." "I expected you would, Lord Venash. Proceed. This human saved the air. This is not in dispute. But the Hall of Names is not a reward ledger. It is a record of service to the Dominion. He is not of the Dominion. He cannot have served it. To enter his name here is to dilute the meaning of the hall for every name already entered." The Queen did not answer at once. Ethan, standing at the center of the hall, felt the moment tilt. He had been ready for this. He spoke before the Queen could. "Lord Venash." The High Lord turned. "You're right," Ethan said. "I'm not of the Dominion. I walked that road as a human. I'd appreciate if you didn't enter my name. I didn't ask to be here. If you've got a way to honor the woman who died on that mat in my arms, enter hers instead. Her name was Sathiba. She saved your princess. I just carried her. The hall went very still. High Lord Venesh looked at him for a long moment. Then Venesh turned to the Queen and bowed, differently this time, and said, Majesty, I withdraw my objection. Clear's throat, with the court's leave, I move that Sathiba's name be entered today and that the human's name be entered on the day he chooses, by the method he chooses, for the reasons he chooses. If he ever chooses. So moved, said the Queen. Her voice was very quiet. Sathiba's name was entered that afternoon. Ethan's never was. He walked out of that hall unrecorded, which was, in the end, exactly the way he had wanted it, and which the Valeran people, once they heard the story, understood better than the court had. Within a year, it had become a saying among them, quietly, that the human who had refused his own name was the reason the peace had held. They were not entirely wrong. He stayed. He had said he would. He was not a man who changed his word. He stayed first as a witness and then, as the treaty took shape, as something harder to name. He was given quarters in the palace, not grand ones, a set of rooms near the royal apartments that looked out over a small courtyard with a fountain in it. He was given a translator and then slowly stopped needing one. He was given a role, at his request, that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with medicine. The Dominion had never had a resident human specialist in cross-species pediatric trauma. They did now. He worked long days. He got used to eating violet food. He learned, without ever quite deciding to how to read the play of color in a Valeran face, the way he had once read the play of expression in a human one. Lyra, who had been a baby on a mat, became a toddler who walked, and then a small, fierce person who ran. She had a very particular habit. Every morning before her lessons, she came to Ethan's quarters and climbed onto his bed and put her small palm flat against his sternum, and did not say anything for about a minute. Her mother had told her once that this was where she had slept as a baby when she was sick. Lyra had taken the information the way small children take information that feels important. She had decided that the place on her human's chest was her place, and that checking on it every morning was a thing she needed to do in order for the rest of the day to work. Ethan, for his part, had stopped trying to explain to anyone, even himself, what it felt like to have that small palm there every morning. He just let it happen. He had learned on a lot of roads what to let happen. The Queen, whose name in private became Zareth and not Zareth, had not married again after the death of her husband 6 years before. She did not marry Ethan either. It was not that kind of story. What happened between them was slower and less announced, and in some ways more durable. It started, as these things do, with long conversations in a garden. It continued, as these things sometimes do, with her hand over his on the low wall of a balcony one evening. When the light was wrong and the air smelled like the ocean she had never let herself go back to since her daughter's nurse had died on one. It became, as a few of these things do, the thing they told each other without much fuss, and then simply lived inside. The Valeran people, who had been prepared to tolerate a human advisor, found themselves, over the slow course of 2 years, tolerating a human at the Queen's elbow at formal functions. By the 3rd year, they had stopped tolerating it. They had started, without quite admitting it, to expect it. On the anniversary of the day he had walked out of that house on Meriden with a baby against his collarbone, every year Ethan took Lyra down to the ocean, just the two of them. They would walk along the shore for an hour. She would ask him the same 3 questions she always asked. He would answer them the same way he always did. He would tell her about a woman named Sathiba, who had loved her very much and who had asked, with her last piece of strength, that a stranger do a thing he had no reason to do. The year she turned 12, Lyra asked a 4th question for the first time. They were walking on a gray beach on the northern coast. She was as tall as his collarbone now, and her hair had gone from silver to a darker, adult shade, and the markings on her cheekbones had begun to come in. She walked beside him with her hands in the pockets of her coat and her eyes on the titterline, and she said, without turning her head, "Why did you not take the name?" "In the hall." "Yes." He thought about it for a long time. He had known the question was coming, the way a man knows a tide is coming. "Because putting my name on a wall would have made me important to that story," he said. "I wasn't. The women who died were. The women who helped were. The woman on the mat who asked me. The old fisherwoman with the black sail. The shipping clerk's wife who thought you had your father's eyes. Me being on that wall would have pushed them off of it. I didn't want that." Lyra walked a few more steps, then she said very quietly, "The shipping clerk's wife." "Yes. You never told me that one. I wasn't sure you were old enough." "I am." "I know." He told her the whole of it that afternoon. The cart with the one-eyed beast. The gray-green scrap. The 9-year-old with the stick. The sentence the older boy had translated from his mother. Lyra listened the way her mother listened, with a quality of attention that did not look like anything until you realized, after that, she had not looked away from your face once. When he was done, she stopped walking and stood for a minute looking out at the water. "Father," she said. It was not the first time she had said it. It was one of the first times she had said it when they were alone with nothing else going on. "I am going to find that family. When I am older, I am going to find every person who helped you carry me. I am going to thank them. Little bird. I mean it. I know you do." She took his hand. They walked back up the beach. The Dominion and the Federation did not become allies right away. They became, first, careful neighbors, then slowly partners. Then, over the course of a decade, something that historians on both sides would eventually call a friendship, a word that had almost never been used to describe a relationship between two large powers, and that turned out, in the mouths of the people who had built it, to be exactly the right word. The details of how it was built filled a lot of books. The origin of it filled one line. The origin of it was a sentence that a 14-month-old girl had spoken in a council chamber, at the only moment in the whole long history of both peoples when a single sentence in a small voice could have turned the world. "Mom, that's him." Queen Zareth, many years later, when she was older and her silver hair had gone fully white and the luminescent on her cheekbones had faded the way they faded with age, was asked by a Velaran biographer what she remembered most clearly about the day her daughter had been returned to her. The biographer expected her to talk about the reunion, about the moment she had first felt Lyra's weight in her arms again. She did not. She talked about the silence. She said it had been the only silence in her entire life that had been exactly the right length, long enough to understand, short enough to act. She said that in that silence she had heard, for the first time in a month, her own heartbeat without rage in it. She said that a war she had been about to start had died in that silence, and that a peace she had not yet imagined had been born in it, and that both of those things had been done, in the end, by a very small girl who had known, before anyone else in the room had known, that the man at the far wall was the one who had carried her home. The biographer asked the Queen if she would have found her way there anyway, without the interruption, without the child's voice. The Queen was quiet for a long moment. "No," she said. "I would not. I was too angry. I was going to kill him, and then I was going to kill a great many other people who look like him. I know that now. I knew it then. My daughter saved my honor as well as her own life that day. She was 14 months old. She did not know what she had done. She only knew that a person she loved had been brought back into the room. That was the whole of her reason. That was enough." The biographer wrote it down. The biographer, who was Velaran and had grown up, clear his throat, in the piece, thought about it for a long time after. The biographer eventually published the interview on the 30th anniversary of the treaty under a title that the Queen, when she saw it, approved with a small, tired nod. The title was the sentence the baby had said. It was the only sentence in the entire long history of the Dominion that had ever been written in standard on the cover of a book meant for Velaran readers. The publisher had been nervous about that. The Queen had not been. She had said, when the proof was shown to her that it was right. She had said that the sentence belonged to both languages now. She had said that her daughter, who was by then a grown woman with children of her own, and who had, in her 20s, quietly traveled to Meriden and found the shipping clerk's family, and pressed her palm to a woman's lined cheek, and thanked her without ever once explaining who she was, would have agreed. And she had said, finally, with a small, private half-smile, that the people closest to her had learned, over the decades, was the expression she wore when she was thinking about the human who had walked out of a dying town with her daughter against his neck, that in the end, every peace in the history of every world had come from someone recognizing someone else, and her daughter had simply had the good sense to do it out loud.